Everything in this video is compiled from multiple sources. If anything seems off or you spot an error, drop it in the comments. A sailor stands at the rail of his ship staring at three shapes gliding through the water below. Half human, he swears, singing sailors to their doom. He writes it down in his official ship's log. His name is Christopher Columbus, and what he actually saw wasn't nearly as beautiful as legend promised. This is 9 more ancient myths that turned out to be real, just not in the way anyone originally believed. The Sirens. Beautiful, irresistible singers luring sailors to shipwreck on rocky shores, a legend woven through Greek mythology and repeated for thousands of years afterward. Just a poetic warning about temptation, most people assume. Here's a detail most people miss entirely. The Sirens didn't start out looking anything like the mermaid image most people picture today. In Homer's original telling and in Greek art for centuries afterward, sirens were depicted as bird women, human heads and torsos attached to a bird's body and wings, perched on rocky islands rather than swimming in open water. Over time, particularly through medieval bestiaries describing exotic creatures, that image gradually merged with an entirely separate legend, the mermaid, until the two became essentially interchangeable, and siren started meaning a fish-tailed woman in the water just as often as a bird woman on the rocks. That merged, mermaid version of the legend is where the real explanation comes in. Sailors kept reporting actual sightings for centuries, describing strange, human-like creatures swimming near their ships. Marine biologists studying these historical accounts point to a specific, real culprit: manatees and dugongs, large, slow-moving aquatic mammals that can rear partially out of the water and, from a distance, in poor lighting, present a silhouette startlingly close to a human torso. Christopher Columbus himself logged an encounter with what he described as mermaids off the coast of Hispaniola in 1493, though he noted, with some disappointment, that they weren't nearly as attractive as the old stories promised. The singing was invention, borrowed from a completely different bird-woman legend, layered on top. The creature swimming in the water very much wasn't. Medusa and the Gorgons. Women with living snakes for hair, capable of turning any onlooker to stone with a single glance. Surely nothing but pure symbolic nightmare fuel. Art historians studying the earliest surviving Gorgon imagery have noticed something curious. Many ancient depictions show a wide, grimacing mouth, protruding tongue, and radiating snake-like tendrils framing the face, a combination researchers have connected to a specific and very real source of ancient terror: actual venomous snake encounters combined with the appearance of octopi whose radiating tentacles and unsettling direct stare bear an odd resemblance to early Gorgon art. Some classicists have also proposed that grotesque Gorgon masks were deliberately fashioned after animal skulls, mounted on temples specifically as apotropaic objects, symbols meant to ward off evil by looking as horrifying as possible. Medusa wasn't invented to explain nothing. She may have been assembled specifically to explain fear itself, borrowing pieces from creatures that were already, quite reasonably, terrifying. The Leviathan and the Behemoth. Described in ancient texts as almost incomprehensibly massive creatures, one ruling the sea, the other ruling the land, both far beyond any animal a listener could reasonably picture. Pure theological metaphor, most modern readers assume. Except biblical scholars examining the original physical descriptions have pointed out something specific. The behemoth is described with a tail like a cedar tree and enormous strength in its stomach muscles, details that line up remarkably well with a hippopotamus, an animal genuinely capable of killing far more people annually even today than lions or crocodiles. The Leviathan's description, meanwhile, matches closely with the Nile crocodile, an armored, nearly unstoppable predator that would have been a constant, terrifying presence along ancient Near Eastern rivers. Ancient audiences hearing these descriptions likely weren't imagining abstract, impossible monsters at all. They were picturing animals they'd actually encountered, simply amplified into something worthy of describing a god's power over creation. Selkies. mythical seal people from Scottish and Irish folklore, said to shed their sealskin on land and become human, only to long forever for the sea. A tragic, romantic legend, most people assume, purely symbolic. Marine biologists studying gray seals have pointed out something that makes the legend's persistence much easier to understand. Gray seals possess large, strikingly human-like eyes, and their vocalizations, particularly during breeding season, have been described by researchers and observers alike as eerily close to a human voice, sometimes even a mournful singing cry carrying across open water at night. Coastal communities hearing those calls and glimpsing those unmistakably expressive eyes from a distance had a genuinely uncanny animal encounter to work with. The Selkie wasn't purely invented longing. It had a real creature's eyes staring back the entire time, the Wendigo, a malevolent, emaciated spirit from Algonquian folklore said to possess people and drive them toward cannibalism, especially during brutal winter isolation. Pure supernatural horror, most assume, invented to frighten children away from the woods. Except real, documented historical cases exist. In 1878, a Plains Cree trapper named Swift Runner, starving alongside his family in Alberta, killed and ate his wife and 5 children, just 25 miles from an emergency food supply post, close enough that hunger alone doesn't fully explain what happened. He was tried and executed. In 1907, an Ojibwe medicine man named Jack Fiddler, known within his community for defeating people believed to be transforming into Wendigos, was arrested for one such killing. These aren't legends. They're documented court cases. What remains genuinely disputed among anthropologists is whether these cases represent a real, recognizable psychiatric pattern, sometimes labeled Wendigo psychosis, or whether that label itself was an overreach, with some researchers arguing outside observers imposed a tidy diagnostic category onto a much messier, more varied set of real human tragedies. The Wendigo wasn't invented from nothing to scare people out of the forest. Real people really died. Scholars simply still disagree on how to explain why. The Banshee, a wailing female spirit from Irish folklore said to shriek outside a home as an omen that someone inside is about to die. Surely nothing more than superstition passed down to explain grief in advance. Except wildlife researchers studying the barn owl have documented something that lines up unsettlingly well with the legend. Barn owls produce a piercing, drawn-out screech, strikingly different from the soft hoot most people associate with owls. A sound frequently described by people encountering it unexpectedly at night as eerily close to a human scream. Barn owls are also pale white, silent in flight, and often nest near old buildings and graveyards, exactly the kind of setting where a sudden shriek in the dark would land hardest. A community without a clear explanation for that sound at that hour near that location had every reason to build a legend around it. The phoenix, a mythical bird that dies in flame and is reborn from its own ashes, a symbol of renewal found in Egyptian, Greek, and countless later traditions. Purely poetic invention, most assume, a metaphor with no real starting point. Except researchers studying bird behavior in parts of Australia have documented something genuinely startling. Certain birds of prey, including black kites and whistling kites, have been observed deliberately picking up smoldering sticks from active wildfires and carrying them to unburned areas, spreading the fire further, apparently to flush out small prey fleeing the flames. Indigenous Australian communities had documented this exact behavior in oral tradition long before Western researchers formally confirmed it in 2017. A bird genuinely associated with carrying fire, appearing at the edge of flame and smoke, isn't a difficult leap to a bird mythologized as being born from fire itself. The phoenix's connection to flame may not be pure metaphor. It may be a real, documented behavior, misread through a very different cultural lens. Cerberus, a monstrous three-headed hound guarding the gates of the underworld, so fearsome that only Heracles himself ever managed to get past it as the final of his 12 labors. Obviously nothing but symbolic imagination, most assume. Except a 4th century BC Greek writer named Palaephatus, who specialized in offering rationalized explanations for mythological monsters, proposed something specific. In his account, Cerberus wasn't a three-headed monster at all. He was one of 2 entirely ordinary guard dogs belonging to a figure named Geryon, who lived in a city called Tricranium, Greek for 3 heads. Palaephatus argued that both the dog and its owner picked up the 3-headed description simply from the name of that city, a description later generations took literally, turning an ordinary dog with an unusual regional nickname into a genuine multi-headed monster. It's worth being honest that this is one ancient writer's specific rationalization, not a settled modern consensus, and other ancient sources described Cerberus very differently, sometimes with a serpent's tail, sometimes covered in snakes. But it's a real, documented ancient theory, not a modern guess. Cerberus's most famous, most impossible feature possibly started as nothing more than a place name attached to a perfectly normal dog. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And if there's a topic you want covered, let me know in the comments.